It's another Football Friday. We are not in the Oklahoma newsroom, though, today because it's a snow day, but I'm joined by Brooke Pryor, our OU beat writer, as we are both remote and snowed in. Brooke, how are things down in Norman?
Well, I woke up this morning and my entire parking lot is covered over in snow. So it's great. I woke up, put on my onesie and grabbed a cup of coffee, and I am not complaining at all.
Well, I'm still in my pajamas as well. I am happy to be warm and cozy at home. I do have a 4-year-old running around the house, so at any moment we could be interrupted. My apologies to all you OU football fans for that. But we've got news we need to talk about. Obviously, earlier this week came the news that Samaje Perine was leaving for the NFL. Now, Thursday, late afternoon, Joe Mixon makes it official. He's headed to the NFL. Brooke, we might have seen a little bit of the signs that Perine was leaving, some of the things that were said along the way, but this Mixon decision was very much up in the air. How much of a surprise was it to you that Joe Mixon decided to go to the NFL?
I was kind of surprised, especially given that if he came back next year, he knew Samaje was gone. He would be the running back. Also, with D.D. Westbrook gone, you have a lot of opportunities to catch the ball, which we saw him do a lot this year. So he really had a chance to be everything for OU football, but decided that, he might as well go to the NFL, get paid, and you can't blame a guy for that either. I think it might have helped him to have another season here in an insulated environment and be able, to have more therapy, have more, whatever he needs, just get another season between him and the release of that tape. But obviously he decided that, his draft stock is going to be, he'll take what he gets this year. He got a first-round draft grade. That does not mean that he's going to go in the first round. It just means that he's already got that first-round talent. So in his eyes, I think he says, well, what do I need another season for? I'm a top-notch grade. I don't need another year.
Well, I think that had to be the calculus, didn't it, Brooke, when it came down to, how much distance was going to help him in another year? Was he still going to have to answer questions about the video? Presumably he would with NFL teams. So when you see that first round draft grade, do you think that's what ultimately swayed him? Or, we've obviously heard Ryan Aber, your cohort, reported, a few weeks ago on NFL Scout saying, listen, this guy's going to fall down a little bit in the draft. And that was before the video came out. Now we've heard words like undraftable. I mean, does that first round grade sway him, or do you think there might, be some other things going on here?
I think it's a collection of things. I'm sure he's heard the undraftable thing, but at the end of the day, I mean, teams will take a risk on guys like Greg Hardy gets signed by the Cowboys, Tyreek Hill gets drafted. There's points and there's teams where they look at it and say, this talent, the risk that we have drafting this guy, the talent outweighs the risk. And if he ends up being a bust, he ends up being a bust. Then we cut him and we move on. They can always replenish the next year. So there will be a team, I'm thinking late round. I don't think he goes in the first two, 3 rounds, but, maybe late 7th or so. He gets picked up and he'll be a steal for any team that gets him talent-wise. Now, risk-wise and, will he have another violent episode? Will there be something else? Will there be more off-the-field issues? These are things that these teams are going to have to kind of, rationalize and decide, is he worth that risk? And there will be a team that will say, yeah, we'll do it.
Yeah, this is an interesting case, Brooke, when it comes to the other instances you mentioned. Greg Hardy gets picked up by the Cowboys after he was cut by the Panthers. Tyreek Hill gets drafted by the Chiefs after an arrest, a domestic violence arrest at Oklahoma State. He was, dismissed by the Cowboys. But this instance is a guy getting drafted, and there is that videotape out there. We saw what happened with Ray Rice after the videotape of the punch that he delivered to his then fiance. Some might say, well, maybe Ray Rice was on the downside of his career, but it is interesting. This, to my knowledge, is the first time we've had a situation of a guy with, great on the field talent, but that off field video evidence, how is that going to weigh out? I guess we have to see, but it seems like it is a unique situation that Joe Mixon is walking into here.
Absolutely. And I think it also kind of sets the tone for how teams are going to deal with this going forward, because as much as I would like to say this is the last case that will happen, it won't be. Something else will happen next year or in a couple of years that will harken back to this Joe Mixon thing, just like the Ray Rice video happened. And now we're all harkening back to that with Joe Mixon. I think we can say that the Ray Rice thing did set the tone for a while in the NFL. He was on the decline. It's also interesting that he hasn't been picked up, or at least seem to be given the pass that Joe Mixon has been given in a lot of cases, because Ray Rice was very apologetic and kind of, has gone on this apology tour. He's been really vocal, trying to help other younger guys. And we didn't see that at all from Joe Mixon. Part of that, of course, he says his legal team said he couldn't apologize. There were lawsuits and things like that. But I think that will be a thing to look at going forward. He also had the incident with the parking attendant where he whipped up the ticket and drove at that attendant. So I think that there are some character things that these teams are going to have to work through and decide, again, with that risk. But as much as the undraftable thing sounds, realistic, it's not. NFL is about money. It's about making money from the talent they can get. And Joe Mixon has that talent that will bring, Tyreek Hill moved the Chiefs from a non-contender to a contender. So there wasn't video evidence, so I think they can reconcile that a little bit better. But somebody's going to take a chance on Joe Mixon.
Yeah, and I guess in the end, he doesn't have to be draftable by every team's standards. Only one team has to take him. Is that what he's banking on?
I think so. I think we talked about this before yesterday, that all it takes is, one team saying, hey, we want you, and he's going to have to answer the questions regardless. And when he is at OU, he is in this microscope of every little thing he does will be questioned, will be scrutinized. In the Sugar Bowl, he plays to the crowd, or looks like he's playing to the crowd when they're chanting, he hits women. The touchdown celebration where he's being pummeled in the chest by his teammates. Things like that are going to be asked about over and over again at OU, and in the NFL, he's just one of many. And there's a chance he's not going to be stuck. He's not going to be on the field for a while, so he will be out of the spotlight for a little bit.
Yeah, all interesting questions. We'll begin to piece that together, I'm sure, as Joe Mixon does pro day. You wonder, will he be invited to the combine with that first-round talent? Would give every team a chance to talk to him at one place. So we'll continue, obviously, to follow the story to see how this all goes. Brooke, for a second, let's rewind on Samaje Perine, because obviously he is now sort of secondary, I think, to the bigger story of OU needing to replace all this talent at running back. But I think we need to stop for a second and talk about this career rushing record that Samaje Perine reached, 4,122 yards. No Oklahoma running back has ever reached that mark before, and we know the talent at running back that has come through Oklahoma. Put it into context for us, Brooke. You saw him chase the record all year. You saw him get it at the Sugar Bowl. How do you sort of wrap your head around what Samaje Perine did when it comes to that career record?
Well, the funny thing is, you saying, Samaje's news is secondary to everything else. I think that's how he would prefer it. He doesn't like to be front and center in that way. But we did talk to him at the Sugar Bowl, and he said it's something that he's going to reflect on, in years to come. Look at this thing that I did. This is great. But also along the way, we won the Sugar Bowl. We beat Auburn a couple of years ago, beat Alabama. Or not beat Alabama. He wasn't there for that. But the team itself picked up so many accomplishments while he was chasing that record. This year especially, came back from the 1-2 start. I think we'll see, just with his record, was, I don't want to say improbable, because he didn't have a huge margin to close this season, but he was injured for part of it. We didn't think he was out for 3 games, didn't think he was going to get it. But the funny thing is, I talked to Joe Washington a couple times during the season, and even if Samaje was out, not playing, he said, nope, he's going to get it. There's no, doubt in my mind that he's going to get that record. And lo and behold, he did it in the Sugar Bowl, helped OU win. And it was a really fitting end that OU already had it in the bag. And then he crossed that finish line and got the record.
Yeah. And, like you say, he's not only injured, but he is splitting carries. He split more carries with Joe Mixon these last 2 years than he did that freshman year. So clearly a different dynamic, but it didn't ultimately keep him from that mark. I know that a lot of people will probably debate, where does he stand amongst those greats at OU? And, neither you or I, Brooke, were around during the days of Billy Sims or Joe Washington, or I was here for Adrian Peterson. I have to say, from a college standpoint, he was probably the most dynamic player I ever saw on the field in a Sooner uniform. But, I think a lot of debate out there, but it still stands that Samaje Perine has the numerical record. A guy like Joe Washington's around to see it, to watch him do that. I get the feeling like those other running backs are really proud that Samaje Perine is at the top of the list. I'm sure the debate will go on for years, though, right? About who is actually the best running back in OU history.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's going to be a debate that they even have 15 years from now when somebody else goes and tops that list. I think the thing with Samaje that makes him maybe not thought of as good as or as the best as, Billy Sims or Joe Washington or Adrian Peterson is his personality. He's very low key. And I think OU, when you have so many good running backs, to be considered the best, I think you have to be a little boastful, a little bit, let everybody know how good you are, at least, be a loud guy, be visible, versus Samaje would rather, nobody recognize him. Don't ask him for his autograph. He wants to fly under the radar. So it's really interesting that he is now the new record holder when he doesn't really want any part of the celebrity that comes along with that.
Yeah, definitely not nearly the personality, shall we say, that the Billy Sims or Joe Washington were. He more in the mold of Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson definitely not kind of the gregarious guy when he was in college, but a great talent nevertheless. Brooke, as we talk about Joe Mixon, as we talk about Samaje Perine, obviously now leaving Oklahoma with that, backfield, the question marks that are there. I think offensively, you also have to look more broadly at the amount of yards and touchdowns that those two, in addition to D.D. Westbrook, a senior who will also be gone, that they contributed. Now the question becomes, what do you build around? Obviously, Baker Mayfield's a good place to start, but let's talk about that backfield for a second. They do have some guys returning, but how much of a concern do the Sooners have about that running back position?
I think there would be more of a concern if the offensive line wasn't intact from the season. I don't want to say that you could throw anybody back there, but with the talent that they have a bunch of 4-star, 5-star guys. You can put any 4-star guy back there, and they're going to be helped along by that offensive line, by Baker Mayfield, and they'll kind of be guided at least through the first couple of games to try to get their feet under them, that kind of thing. And you've got, Abdul Adams. He got game action this year as a true freshman. He obviously wasn't a major role player in the way that Mixon and Perine were, but you have him. Rodney Anderson's going to be returning from injury. He's a guy that was really highly touted coming in and looked good until he got hurt against Tennessee and then had the neck injury this past year. So if he stays healthy, he'll be a major key. You have 2 freshmen coming in Kennedy Brooks and Trey Sermon. And then you also have the JUCO transfer, Marcellus Sutton. So I think with those guys, nobody is a name brand this year the way that Perine and Mixon were coming into the year. But we didn't know about D.D. Westbrook before this season. We knew about him, but he wasn't the guy. I think one of the guys in that group is going to emerge to become the guy for OU. And if not, somebody mentioned it on my chat, what about Dimitri Flowers? Obviously, there's a lot of things that he can do for this team. I wouldn't be surprised if they throw him back there at running back if necessary, the way when Mixon and Perine were out against Iowa State.
Yeah, it's an interesting question there. How much could they use Dimitri Flowers in a true running back situation? And Brooke, you mentioned 3 new guys coming in. 2 of them will be on campus pretty shortly, right?
Yeah, they will. I believe it's Marcellus Sutton is definitely going to be on campus. And I think it's Kennedy Brooks is the other one that's a mid-year enrollee. And we kind of saw this year, on the defensive side, Caleb Kelly was a mid-year enrollee. And just you could see by the middle of the season this year, he wasn't a freshman anymore. He was a veteran guy. And a lot of that, I think, comes from having that first semester on campus when he can get integrated with the team, get used to everything. And it's not, a shock when he gets in there in March and August for preseason practice and all that stuff.
As you think about next season, obviously lots of time between now and then. We'll have spring ball, a preseason camp, obviously in the fall. But is that running back position, does that suddenly become the position that you're most interested to see how it evolves? Or with other losses, like you say, D.D. Westbrook and everything that he provided unexpectedly, maybe receiver. I don't know. What are those the obvious positions to see how they come along, or are you looking at some other things as you think about heading into 2017?
Well, I am definitely interested to see how the running back and wide receivers evolve, because wide receivers do have guys whose names we're aware of that kind of showed flashes of good things in Jeff Mead and Mark Andrews. And then they've also got Marquise Brown, a new guy, a JUCO guy coming in, much in the same way that D.D. Westbrook was that guy. But I'm also interested to see the linebackers on the other side of the ball. They lose Jordan Evans, who wasn't necessarily a really talented guy entering this season. He wasn't the one that you look to make all the plays. In fact, he was the one against Texas Tech that everyone said, what is he doing? This is terrible. But he used that as a gut check, and then he really rebounded the second half of the season and was great. But they'll lose his leadership. They'll lose his talent. But to replace him, there's Caleb Kelly and Obo Okoronkwo, and I think those two guys will be the leaders and kind of shape and set the tone for that linebacking group. And I'm interested to see how they evolve and kind of grab that leadership role.
You know, it is going to be interesting too. And Brooke, I have to think that despite question marks, there are always question marks after every season heading into the next, but I have to think another Big 12 championship, an undefeated Big 12 championship, and then a great performance in the Sugar Bowl, that has to really create a lot of momentum both internally and externally for this program, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you saw yesterday Adrian Ely, an offensive tackle from Louisiana, committed to OU. He filmed his video with Bleacher Report walking the streets of New Orleans. And I don't know, maybe it's just timing, but things are rarely just coincidence in recruiting. There's always something that made one team a little bit better, got the edge on the other. And in this case, OU gets this guy. He's being recruited by LSU, Auburn, Florida, all these SEC programs. Bob Stoops beats the SEC in his backyard and scoops him from LSU and Auburn. And I think that the Sugar Bowl played a big part in that. Bob is very adamant that the bowl win from the previous season won't carry over into the next season, but it will carry over into recruiting. A couple of years ago when OU beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, Joe Mixon committed a couple days later. I don't think that's coincidence. So I think that there is a real bounce from the bowl game, at least into recruiting, and that really sets up OU for years down the road.
Yeah. Lastly, signing day will be here before we know it, early February. But the last sort of question I have for you today, Brooke, is the guys that are out doing the recruiting, those coaches. Obviously, Lincoln Riley was being talked about for some head coaching jobs earlier. It looks like maybe that's died down a little bit, and yet things are still percolating. Obviously, PJ Fleck is leaving Western Michigan. That announced today, going to Michigan. So things are still churning in the coaching carousel. Do you have a feeling like OU is set with its assistants? There's no way to know 100%, I know, but do you feel like the guys that are out there recruiting right now are going to continue to be OU assistants, or could there be any upheaval in that coaching staff?
I think this coaching staff is pretty set. I don't think that Western Michigan is the place where Lincoln Riley that would really fit his talents. Obviously, he's a very charismatic person, and he would do well in that PJ Fleck mold, but his recruiting base is Texas and East Coast. Western Michigan isn't really quite there. Obviously, I think that he is talented enough to get a head coaching job, but I don't know that Western Michigan is that fit for him. I think the biggest thing, assistance-wise, to be looking for is if the NCAA passes this legislation, all college football teams can add an extra assistant. And it'll be interesting to see where Bob Stoops picks to put that assistant. He said that he knows. He's not willing to tell us yet. But we'll be looking to see where that kind of extra staff person ends up.
Yeah, and I don't know if Lincoln Riley is ready to wear a tie and a button-down shirt when he's coaching on the sidelines. That seems like a stretch for him.
That doesn't seem like kind of his style at all.
Yeah, so maybe Western Michigan is out. Well, it'll be interesting to see. We're obviously going to continue to follow that and all of the off-season news as it progresses, but be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoma. And stay warm and stay safe out there, folks.